In the last session, I talked about identity in terms of public identity, private identity, and digital identity, and I showed how the ease of being able to use the social media affects private identity. It seems that the cultural norms that distinguish between public and private identity are shifting. It is like there is a new public-private identity and maybe a deeper private identity. The issue then is the relationship between public and private identity and how it can affect individuals in a professional career or in a career as a politician. I gave several examples of what individuals had done in their private life undermined their public life. The problem area is where private identity contradicts the public identity in a way that is damaging to the individual or damaging to the employer. Another problem area is where actions done when a person is young affect a future career that the person has not anticipated. Justin Trudeau was probably not thinking of himself 18 years in the future as Prime Minister of Canada when he was a teacher and when he went to a party dressed in blackface. Is somebody responsible for what that person did years ago? Should Trudeau have realized that it was wrong in 2001 to dress for a party in blackface even though he didn't have an important public function at the time? Do ethics and sensitivity only apply when a person has a public function in society? The answer to those questions is no. That ethics and sensitivity should apply all the time, including on postings on the social media. And people should be ethical and sensitive in their lives even when they aren't posting on social media. So, in terms of a course like this about professional communication, how you communicate is an expression of your professional identity. How you communicate is an expression of your ethics and sensitivity. Next question. How much control should an employer have over the behavior of an employee on the social media? How much control should an employer have about the way an employee dresses? When somebody goes for a job interview, the person typically dresses in a professional way, but sometimes the person is only dressing that way for the interview, but recognizes right from the beginning, in terms of getting a job, the need to have a professional identity. I'm sure you know of examples of stories of restaurants which have required female employees to dress in a certain way that might feel like an infringement on their rights. Does an employer have the right to do that? Certainly, an applicant for a job should know that before deciding if he or she wants that job. But how far can an employer limit and control an employee, including what the employee is doing off-duty? Can an employer fire an employee for what the employee does when the employee is off-duty? Can an employer fire an employee for what the employee posts on social media? These are all questions about what an employee does in his or her private life, and what an employee does in his or her private life that can affect the person's professional identity and employment. So let me give you an example of the career of a professional athlete and an athlete earning money from advertising endorsements. Ray Rice had a great career in football until he was caught on a security camera in 2014 assaulting his fiancée in an elevator, and then indicted on criminal charges for the assault. A few days after the indictment, Rice married his fiancée. The criminal charges were dropped when Rice agreed to counseling, but the incident still resulted in him being released by his team, the Ravens, and suspended from the National Football League, which saw damage to the brand. An example of that is the career of a professional athlete and an athlete earning money from advertising endorsements. For example, Ray Rice had a great career in football until he was caught on a security camera in 2014 assaulting his fiancée in an elevator, and then was indicted on criminal charges for the assault. A few days after the indictment, Rice married his fiancée. The criminal charges were dropped when Rice agreed to counseling, but the incident still resulted in him being released by his team, the Ravens, and suspended from the National Football League, which saw damage to the brand by being associated with the athlete, and would see damage to the brand for not taking action to condemn what the athlete did. The league reinstated Rice, but his athletic career ended because no team would sign him. Athletes in these circumstances also lose money from endorsing products because the manufacturer does not want the brand to be associated with the athlete. So that's one instance where the private life of the athlete put an end to his public career as an athlete. Here's another example. It was just announced this week that Alexei McCammon, who was hired to take the public media position as the new editor of Teen Vogue in March, is out because of tweets she made 10 years ago. McCammon had deleted the offensive tweets 2 years ago, but screenshots of the tweets were recirculated after news of her Teen Vogue appointment. She says, quote, "I should not have tweeted what I did, and I've taken full responsibility for that. I'm sorry to have used such hurtful and inexcusable language," McCammon tweeted. Quote, "I've apologized for my past racist and homophobic tweets and will reiterate that there's no excuse for perpetuating those awful stereotypes in any way," end quote. And that's what McCammon did to try and address the bad news. Going back, one tweet she made in university was, quote, "Give me a 2 out of 10 mark on my chemistry problem, cross out all of my work, and don't explain what I did wrong. Thanks a lot, stupid teaching assistant. You're great," that tweet read. Another tweet was, quote, "Now Googling how to not wake up with swollen Asian eyes," end quote. Other tweets that she used had the terms homo and gay used in derogatory fashion. Well, the staff opposed McCammon assuming the editorship directly on the social media. This all played out on the social media a few days before McCammon could assume the position. The staff said that McCammon's appointment had threatened the outlet's core values. Quote, "We've built our outlet's reputation as a voice for justice and change. We take immense pride in our work and in creating an inclusive environment," end quote. More than 20 staff wrote these words in a letter posted on Instagram, playing out this whole employment situation, which previously would have been private, in public. But the problems didn't end there for McCammon. Her partner also had problems in professional communication. Just recently, her partner, T.J. Ducklow, had to resign from the White House communications team of new President Joe Biden after he threatened a journalist. Quote, he said, "I will destroy you," end quote. And he said this to a reporter who was trying to investigate his relationship with McCammon before it was public. Another example, what about someone who is a professional public spokesperson and is trained in professional communications? What are the problems there? Well, consider the case of Captain Joe Baker of the Georgia Sheriff's Office, the official spokesperson for the Georgia Sheriff's Office. This office was in the news this week because it was one of the police organizations involved in investigating the killings in that area of the United States where 8 people were murdered at massage parlors. 6 of those 8 people were Asian women. The question is now being raised whether the killings are part of the racial attacks on Asians and other minority groups in the U.S., which seem to have been increased during the coronavirus pandemic and increased during the time of Donald Trump as president. When the suspect for these murders was taken into custody and charged with 8 counts of murder, Captain Baker, led the press conference, and he said, quote, of the accused, quote, he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday he had a really bad day for him, and this is what he did, end quote. Remember that I said before that in delivering bad news, don't minimize or trivialize the bad news or use euphemisms that minimize or trivialize the bad news. That comment of the police spokesman about killing 8 people because the suspect was having a really bad day minimalized and trivialized responsibility for the murders. Is that sensitive to the families of the murdered women, or is that sensitive to Asian Americans who feel vulnerable to racist attacks in the United States? Was that a one-time slip for this police captain? Well, according to this controversy, there was a Facebook posting in March 2020 by the same police captain promoting T-shirts with a racist message. The message on the T-shirts was, quote, COVID-19 imported virus from China, end quote. The implication of the message was connecting China to the COVID pandemic in a racist way, connecting Chinese people to the pandemic, with the further implication that Americans with Chinese heritage are connected with the pandemic. The Facebook posting of the T-shirt said, quote, get them while they last, end quote. The press conference was Wednesday night. The Facebook account was taken down Wednesday night. Baker was removed from his position as police spokesperson. He was not acting professionally in how he communicated, and his private life on Facebook tainted his public role. Social media changes the nature of privacy and of the private self and increases the need to be responsible in public. So, could what you post on social media while you are a university student and affect your employment years from now? When you apply for a job, does it occur to you that your potential employer could check you out first on your social media? What would happen if an employer did that just after you graduate and checked out you on your social media? Would that uphold your professional identity, or would it taint and damage your professional identity and affect your chances for employment? So examples are given of how a professional public life can be affected by private actions and by the private character of a person have relevance to you in terms of professional communication, in terms of employment. The relevance to you in terms of employment and professional career is the effect of your private life on your career, maybe in effect many years in the future. It makes sense to be ethical and rational just for the sake of being ethical and rational, even if you don't think you're being observed, and even if you don't think it has ramifications for your years in advance for career opportunities you're not anticipating in the present. I always think of this when I catch a student cheating on a test or on an assignment. Last week, I caught another student cheating on an assignment in another course that I teach. The student had plagiarized the assignment in a way that was so thorough that it could only have been done consciously, not accidentally. And when I looked then at a past assignment of the student, I saw the same pattern. Maybe the student was just getting bolder as time went on. When I see a student like this cheat, I wonder what this person will do later in her life. Will she change or just become bolder in how she cheats? What will happen to her in a professional context? What happens to her later in life when there is greater pressure to cheat and bigger rewards to cheating? I remember one time that a student in one of my professional communications courses for students in the business program at this university cheated on a test. When I caught him, he felt very bad. He hadn't anticipated getting caught. He didn't think about that. He had yielded to impulse and temptation in the moment. And he felt that he was not like that. He felt that wasn't the kind of person he was, but that was his action. That was behavior. Normally when a student cheats, we keep that confidential, but this student asked me if he could address the class about his cheating. When a student cheats, that is also cheating the other students in the class who get their marks honestly. So the student talked to the class. He told them that he cheated and that he felt very disturbed by what he had done. He told the other students that he was talking to them because he didn't want them to make the same mistake he made. The first term I taught the same course that the student was in, I caught 20% of the class cheating. 20%. I started to give a lecture and subsequent terms in this course about not cheating, and was surprised by students who cheated after a lecture about not cheating. Obviously, these students felt the lecture did not apply to them. Obviously, they felt their ethos was not relevant. It didn't matter what they did in university. So like I say, I wonder what a student who cheats in a course in university will do later in life. Will the person change, or will the person just become bolder in how he or she cheats until the person becomes a Bernie Madoff, who's infamous for cheating so many people out of so much money in investments in his pyramid scheme. What will happen to this person in a professional context? What happens to this person later in life when there's greater pressure to cheat and bigger rewards in cheating? The important thing and to consider when I catch a student cheating is to give the person a chance to reflect and a chance to decide if he or she wants to make different choices in the future. As part of the warning, I tell the student this is a wake-up call for this person. The individual is held responsible for what he or she does. Now, so going back to the example of Brittany Kaiser. In the last session, I talked about Brittany Kaiser taking a job with Cambridge Analytica, the private communication company that became notorious for the way it used data illegally obtained about individuals on Facebook to try and influence the 2016 federal presidential election in the United States that elected Donald Trump. Cambridge Analytica was also working around the world and paid to influence elections. Kaiser reluctantly had accepted a job with Cambridge Analytica, and she found that her ethics were compromised by working for the company, partly because she consciously neglected her ethical principles of her private self in order to fit in and feel comfortable with the conflict between her private self and her public self in working for the company. We know this about Brittany Kaiser because she published a memoir called Targeted in 2019 about her years employed by Cambridge Analytica. The memoir not only gives an insider's view about working for the company, it also explores what happens to a person who takes a job where there's a conflict between her outer and her inner identity. At the time when she took the job, Brittany Kaiser says she needed a job and her family was in financial trouble. She believed she could have two separate identities, a public identity working for Cambridge Analytica and a private identity in opposition to her public identity working for the company. She changed her public identity to be compatible with working for Cambridge Analytica, and she tried to have this separate private identity. To those who knew her private self, she hid that she was working for the company. And for the clients of Cambridge Analytica, she hid her private identity. When the Cambridge Analytica controversy blew up, she was trapped by the contradictions in herself that she was living. So that's an important lesson, that you can't live two lives in conflict with each other and keep them separate, or separate the people between who know you in one life and the people who know you in another life. And you can't separate yourself out from the ethical issues of what you do either in public or the ethical issues of what you do in private. So I want to give now some practical tips for communicating through the social media. And the advice I'm going to give now will sound familiar to you because it's the same advice in this course in terms of the lectures and the course text. So these are tips for professional communication using the social media. Number one, have a clear and simple message and summarize that message at the beginning of your communication. Two, start with the most important information in your message and proceed to the least important information. That ensures that the reader does not read all the way. At least the most important information is received. Now, these two pieces of advice, you can see how they apply to the previous assignment in delivering a bad news message, which gave the same advice. Give the bad news right at the beginning. And you see from this advice right now, what happens if you delay the bad news message and the first half of your message sounds really sunny and optimistic, and people and employees don't read any farther, and they just don't know that there have been layoffs. So, give a clear, simple message, summarize the beginning, start with the most important information, and proceed to the least important information. 3, design your message to be clear and legible on any size of device so that it can resize properly. So the point about this is you don't know how your audience online is reading your message, whether on a computer monitor, whether on a tablet, whether on a smartphone. Depending on which medium your audience is using, the image will be of a different size. And so a message, a photo, or written words that are clear on a large computer monitor may not be legible on a smaller smartphone. When I say that, I think of my own experience as a book author, and when a publisher was designing the book cover, and the designer talked to me, and my objection to the one of the prototypes of the cover was that the lettering was small of the title. Now, the designer was probably thinking of how big it would look on the full copy of the book in a bookstore. But people now learn about books and get messages on the internet and digital devices. And I realized that anybody looking at my book cover in a smaller form, a thumbnail photo, or looking at smaller size on a smartphone, wouldn't be able to read the title of the book. It had just been designed for what it would look like in the bookstore, not how it would play on different platforms. So I asked the designer to enlarge the size and to move it into an area where it would stand out better, and the designer did that. 4. Anticipate objections to your message and diffuse them proactively in advance in a positive way. So a simple example of that is when products are sold online, and the objection of the consumer might be that the cost is too high, so the seller breaks it into smaller monthly installments. Now, just the other day, I saw an example of that. I was looking at a product through Amazon, and it was fairly expensive, and my immediate reaction was, oh, that's too much. But then the seller offered to break it down in monthly installments. So that anticipated my objection as a consumer and dealt with it proactively in a positive way. When you're communicating on the social net and communicating in a different dynamic, you want to identify the social influencers and appeal to them in your communication and build a network of the social influencers to work for you. The smart companies advertising now are turning to that tactic because they realize from research that social influencers are selling products better than celebrities. It used to be, you get a well-known celebrity to boost sales of your product. Now the research shows that social influencers, private citizens on social media, or social influencers who have built a large network, do better in selling a product than celebrities. So you want to think about that in terms of circulating your message. You just when you're putting a message on the social media, you want to think of what do you do to spread this message. You don't just post it there. You think of what to do that will spread the message, and one way is building a network and social influencers. And in fact, the research into election tampering in the United States by foreign influencers shows that original messages can be created by bots or by agents that spread to a real human network, and it's a spread to the real human network that does the work of spreading the message. Next point, number 6. Identify to the audience the action you want the audience to take. In any communication, you should do this, and certainly in social media communication. What action do you want the audience to take? So, for example, suppose you're a charity, and the action you want is for people to donate. Well, you want to make the donation, the action, easy to take, and you want it easy for the donors to spread the message, that it become social influencers. So in terms of making it easy, and I've been on the board of directors of a charity foundation for years, a wildlife foundation. Typically, when you're sending out a message asking for donations, you then don't want to say, go to our website, and then the person has to go to the website. When they get the website, they have to hunt around for how they donate. That's making it too difficult for the audience to take action. So what you want to do in a charity or any product you're selling is you want to make it really easy right away to make a donation or to purchase. You want to have the links there. The other thing, as I said, you want to do is you want to turn your donors or your buyers into social influencers that spread it. And you want to create an incentive for your donors or for your buyers to spread the message to others. So, for example, one time there was a fundraising campaign for a charity to support patients undergoing cancer treatment and losing their hair. And part of the campaign strategy was for donors to shave their hair and post a photo of themselves. And this, in a way, rewarded the donor by allowing them to participate and engage more in the fundraising in which they believed. It made them feel good about allowing them to engage and participate and show publicly that they were participating in a cause. And then the strategy, in turn, created a network of people shaving their heads, posting on the internet, and it became a competition amongst others to shave their head and promote the cause. The end result was this campaign raised $1.84 million for cancer research. And so that's a positive example of going viral rather than the earlier negative examples I gave at the start of this session. Next, identify the motivation to the audience and appeal to that motivation. And I've just given an example of that in creating motivation for people to donate and publicly show that they are participating in the charity. They feel good about that. They like that motivation, and it motivates others. Next tip, identify the purpose and values of the audience and reflect that purpose and values of the audience back to the audience in the message. So again, the example I gave of the charity demonstrates that. The purpose and value of the donors was that a humanitarian one. They empathized with the victims of cancer, and they had a sense of purpose in their lives, and it had a value for them to donate and to help those people. So you want to reflect that back. You anticipate that that donating has value for somebody, and you want to make them feel good about that. I know, for example, that I'm on the email for the Jane Goodall Charity Foundation, and when I open these emails, I see that typical kind of message that appeals to the purpose and value of participating with that wildlife charity. Find a reward for your audience, or turn a negative message into a positive message. So again, looking at the example of charities. Charities are asking for money, okay? It's not like buying something, buying a pair of shoes, and you get shoes in the transaction. In a transaction with a charity, you donate, but you don't get anything physically back. So the charity then has to look at what are the rewards for the audience. And sometimes the reward is to increase the person's self-esteem. I'll give another example of that. I volunteered to the Writing Center on campus to help students in various courses. And one time, the Writing Center on the campus wanted to create posters as part of a poster campaign that said, "Come to the Writing Center to correct your grammar." Well, I said, look, the message in this poster is too negative. The message undermines self-esteem. You're saying, come to the Writing Center because something is wrong with you. And also I said, what about the people who are doing well but want to do even better? How does your message appeal to that? It's a negative message. So I suggested the slogan, a positive slogan. I suggest the slogan, it feels great to become a better writer. It feels great to become a better writer. That was turning a negative message into a positive message, and it was turning a kind of negative incentive into a positive incentive. It was making somebody feel good about coming to the Writing Center, not making them feel that something's wrong with them. Okay, so that's an example of the reward can be to increase the person's self-esteem. But also charities look at offering other rewards. And so a typical reward of a charity is a T-shirt with the logo of the charity or a message about the charity. And so the person gets something back, gets a reward for donating besides the feel-good reward of donating to worthwhile charity. You give the person something back, and what you give them allows you to promote the charity, because the person's T-shirt then becomes an advertisement for the charity, and the person becomes a social influencer amongst his or her friends. Others want the T-shirt. They want that feel-good reward about participating. Another thing charities will do is offer a free monthly magazine about the charity. So you donate to a wildlife organization, you might get a magazine about that. A next tip has to do with how often you post messages, communications on the internet in a professional capacity. The tip here is don't do it too much. Some people think that there's an advantage of posting 20 or 30 times a day to promote something. There's not an advantage to that. You're just overwhelming the reader. You're turning the reader off with too many postings. So the fewer postings you make, the likely more attentive people will be to these fewer postings, and then people won't feel deluged by your message, and your message won't be lost against other messages. Final piece of advice about communicating on the internet. Beware of copyright infringement. What this means is you can't use photos and written words without permission. Just because somebody has posted a photo on the internet or written something on the internet and you don't see a copyright mark, that does not mean you can use that, particularly if you use it for commercial purposes. If you use a photo or written material without copyright permission, you can be sued, and your ignorance of the law is no defense. Also, if you're sued for copyright infringement, you now have the cost of hiring a lawyer if you simply don't pay what the person wants. And the person can set a price at however he or she wants in violation of the copyright. Now, if you go through a court case on that, on copyright infringement, first the judge has to decide whether the copyright was infringed, and second of all, the judge can set the level of compensation. So this is a problem for you in professional communication, that you don't want to infringe on copyright. So let me give you an example. Most of the students taking this course this term are in tourism. If you operated a tourism business and you saw somebody's really nice travel photo on Facebook, and you took that photo and you used it on your Facebook site to promote your business, even if you're not directly asking for money at the time, it's still a commercial transaction. You can't do that. You don't have copyright to do that. And the person can turn around and sue you for copyright infringement, which not only can be costly, it can create bad publicity for your employer, for your company. How do you get a copyright? Well, it's not like a registered trademark. A registered trademark, that's the little R with the circle that you see about a company name or a company slogan. For a trademark, you have to go through a process of filing paperwork with the government and paying a fee to have a registered trademark, which then protects you and your company against anybody else using that. Copyright isn't that way. Somebody does not have to register copyright with the government. Just the very act of creating something unique that is recorded or in a form that isn't perishable, that automatically becomes copyrighted. And so for students in my courses, I teach photography courses, I tell the students, as soon as you take a photo, that's your copyrighted photo. And posting it online does not take away your copyright. Online sites and social media are now paying more attention to copyright issues. If you go to Google, for example, Google allows you to search for copyright-free photos. Music sites allow you to use copyright-free music. As you know, so those of you who have YouTube sites, if you use music that's copyrighted, YouTube will catch that and put a block in. And we also know that social media are now raising the elevation of responsibility for content of private citizens on the social media, so that false information, fake news posted online on social media that's false in terms of election campaigns or false in terms of the COVID pandemic now can be taken down, or a warning can be posted up. I think you're probably aware that former U.S. President Donald Trump, his Facebook, his Twitter was removed from him. He lost the ability to post to Twitter because of the false information that he was publishing. So think about the relationship between your public identity and your private identity. Think about what you're doing now when you consider yourself to be a university student, a private Think about what you're posting now, what kind of identity you're creating for yourself now that can have ramifications for you later in life. Consider now in professional messaging on the internet that it's now a two-way dynamic on the internet. That is, with Web 1.0, the audience could not react and respond. With Web 2.0, that creates a two-way dynamic on the social media. That creates engagement so that the audience can respond, the audience can comment, and that creates engagement, and audiences now are attracted to situations where there's this kind of engagement. So in that that two-way dynamic of Web 2.0 does that, and it has positive and negative aspects of it. The negative aspect is that the audience can now respond negatively, or the audience can misinterpret a message, or the audience can turn a message in a new direction, and you as the professional lose control of that message. And that's something you want to be careful about. We know from research that there seems to be an amplification effect in the internet, a greater polarization of message, whether positive or negative. That is, positive messages become more positive, negative messages become more negative in this polarization. And so that can be good and that can be bad. It means that, if your message is getting positive reception, that positivity may build. However, if your message is trending in a negative way, that negativity may increase, get its momentum, and get out of control for you. Also, because of this polarization of this new digital technology and the social media, this polarization and amplification effect can increase support for one thing at the cost of minimizing support for something else. So, it creates a feedback loop that can make one thing more and more popular at the expense of other things. So, consider an example: a film which grows in popularity because of the amplification effect and polarization on the internet and social media. The popular film becomes more and more popular, while a film that isn't building that popularity can be losing popularity because of that. Anyway, you have to bear in mind in professional communication on the internet that it's a two-way dynamic, and you have to anticipate that two-way dynamic. So, for example, think of hotel reviews or restaurant reviews. When the audience has the ability to respond and comment on a business, like a hotel or a restaurant, that communication can get out of control for the business. And particularly if it's a negative message, and particularly if the negative message is not merited. So that dynamic in the communication, in the technology, can mean that a business loses control over the message as a negative message starts to feedback. Then what becomes important is how the business responds. So to give an example, there was an incident where an airline broke a passenger's guitar and refused to compensate the passenger. Now, before the internet, the passenger would be unhappy about that, but there wasn't much the passenger could do. The airline didn't want to compensate that. That would remain private. Well, it's changed. Communication has changed, and what happened is the disgruntled customer, who was a guitar player, made a funny satirical song about the airline breaking his guitar and posted it on YouTube. And so it snowballed. And it was so entertaining, it was so funny, it was so satirical, that it created a groundswell of response, a viral response, which spread the message. And this video had 17.7 million views on YouTube and 18,000 comments on YouTube. One comment was, quote, "Thumbs up if you watch this in marketing class," end quote. There was a book about this, and the customer started doing speaking engagements about this. So imagine you're the airline, okay? And you're thinking old school, pre-internet. The customer can't do anything if you refuse to compensate for breaking the guitar. Look at the damage to the brand by a video being viewed by over 17 million people and 18,000 comments. Of course, there's probably one of the reasons it might have gone viral, besides being entertaining and funny, was because there was probably widespread customer dissatisfaction out there about airlines, and so customers who were disgruntled now like to see this kind of payback for it. That should be something that the business anticipates now, and businesses have to do that. So businesses, if they allow for reviews, they now have to answer those negative reviews, and they have to be diligent because they're being watched in their ethos in how they handle the bad news of that complaint. In other cases, it's out of their hands. So if you go to Expedia, as I do when I'm booking a hotel, I look at the reviews. Now, those reviews are done through Expedia. They're not controlled by the hotel. So the hotel can't stop those negative reviews, and that situation can snowball on them, and they have to anticipate that and deal with it before it becomes a problem. I know one website that attempted to allow feedback but eliminate negative feedback, and this was a website that was emerging for environmental action. It was called CareMob. And at the time, I was on the board of directors for a wildlife charity, and the charity was interested in participating in the site and reaching people through the site. I said, no, it's not a good deal for our charity. I recommended against using the site. So part of the problems with the site is that, one, it was a closed system. It was closed to members only. So you could only get in there if you joined, and it didn't register on the internet. It wouldn't show up on internet searches. So that in itself, as a closed system for members only, that didn't reach a larger audience. It didn't build a network. Now, this new website didn't allow feedback comments. in order to eliminate negative postings. But of course, in not allowing feedback, it's also eliminating positive posting. It's not engaging the audience and benefiting from how engaging an audience galvanizes an audience. The only thing you could do on this site was click a like button, and that wasn't very satisfying. That wasn't engaging. So I recommended to the board that the way this site was set up to communicate, its intentions were good. It would be frustrating for users. It would create resentment in itself. It would create problems, and it really wouldn't reach an audience and build an audience. And so the year it was launched, it had 644 followers on Facebook. It was not a runaway success. It had a bad strategy for engaging, trying to just engage positively and deal with this issue of negative reviews and comments. Another example I would give you is the newspaper industry. So when the web switched from 1.0 to 2.0 and allowed audiences to engage, newspapers were experimenting with allowing readers to comment on news stories. The idea was that that would create engagement with the newspaper. And of course, it didn't create revenue, but it was positive in the sense that it created engagement with readers when they could read, when they could post comments, and they could read what comments others people posted. The problem was several problems. One problem was negative, misleading, and wrong and prejudicial comments. So now there was a responsibility to moderate the comments. And in moderating the comments, you now had to employ somebody, a staff member, to moderate the comments, and this person is not producing revenue. The person is just moderating comments. That's very time consuming, and it also, the moderation created a legal complication that now made the organization even more legally responsible for getting rid of defamatory remarks and grossly misleading remarks. So then some newspapers started to limit the time that people could comment, maybe to an hour, maybe to 2 hours, and what a number of newspapers ended up doing online is simply not allowing for the comments. That it created a larger problem in the responsibility for moderating. And we're at a point now with the internet and social media where companies are partly being forced to take more responsibility for the posting of private citizens. So you're noticing this in Facebook, and Twitter, and other social media that they now will post a disclaimer that the information is not true, or they will not allow the information, particularly in cases of giving people false information about the COVID pandemic, information that is harmful to society and harmful for individuals. So social media are now ramping up their rules. They're creating algorithms to track down these sorts of destructive messages and have them removed. Like I said, Donald Trump had his Twitter account deleted by Twitter because of his messaging. There's even an interesting breakthrough in Australia where there's been a a battle between the social media and the owner of newspaper corporations, because they were losing revenue when the social media could post their stories, but the media didn't get any revenue for that. And just recently, there have been deals now signed in Australia where the social media platforms have to pay media outlets for their information. Of course, social media outlets don't want this, but now that it's actually gaining a foothold, it's something to watch as it spreads. So, final message here is that the Web 2.0 is a two-way dynamic that makes it more difficult to control the message. Your message can get out of control, and so you have to be doing more thought about what kind of message you are posting and how you would deal with an audience that can react and disagree and misinterpret your message. All part of what you now need to know as a professional communicator using the social media.